Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. We are getting together tonight to open a new tractate of the Talmud, tractate Beitzah. This is the 8th volume of the Talmud, and these are the laws that are particular to festivals, and particularly as distinguished from Shabbos, right? So there's the same general restriction, prohibition on doing work on festivals that there is on Shabbos, but with a few important differences. And the 39 pages of this tractate will get into those differences. We'll open tonight, not with the general, the Talmud is always like this, right? It doesn't say, okay, these are the general categories that we're going to be studying. Let's start with the basic rules, and then we'll get into the tougher cases. Very often, a volume of the Talmud will jump right into the discussion of a difficult subject, because it was meant for the sages themselves, right? Or the bright students in the classroom, let's say. And so they want to pique the interest of the advanced learner. So, we're not all such advanced learners, and we're going to have to break it down. And it's going to be great. We're going to have a discussion on an egg that was laid on a festival and whether we're allowed to eat it or not. And the sages are going to debate this point quite passionately. Who is with us tonight as we enter tractate Beitzah? Oh, and that was the Moshav band. We're working our way through their album, Shabbat Volume 1. And that song was about, with an eternal love, have you loved us, O Lord. Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula in Chicago, Yehuda in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in Oklahoma, Kevin giving it a big thumbs up, John in Sedona, Hannah in New York, Christo in Lubbock, Melissa in New York, Lucy in Minnesota, Nancy in North Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Bill in Missouri, Francisco in California, Renee in Indiana, Janique, what a beautiful name, from Boston, Chaim in Charlotte, Gisette in Colorado, Shandora in the Bronx, Paula in the Great Northwest over there on the YouTube side, Seraphim in Sacramento, Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. Before we jump in, and it's a big page, and we're going to be moving right along, so I was thinking, well, maybe I won't do a little introductory section. I often like to, just add some bit of Torah that has appealed to me lately, or as, when we're in a holiday period that's relevant to what's going on now in the calendar. But I was struck this morning when I was doing the slichos prayers, these special prayers of pleading with God, and getting into that, that penitential frame of mind as we approach Rosh Hashanah. We're all going to be judged. What is our fate for the coming year? And we're going to really open our hearts to God. That's what Rosh Hashanah and the days of awe leading up to Yom Kippur are all about. And so the sages added these slichot or slichos prayers that we say in the week running up to Rosh Hashanah. The Sephardim say it for the whole month of Elul. And this particular one, very simple, repetitious, almost mesmerizing type of prayer really stood out to me this morning. I was thinking about reading it to you, then I thought, well, maybe I'll just skip it because we have a lot to cover. And then our daughter, who's at seminary in Jerusalem for the year studying, reached out to us on a WhatsApp and sort of a live FaceTime call. And she was standing at the Western Wall in the midst of a huge crowd doing slichos prayers. I mean, it was just beautiful. And what part were they doing? Precisely this prayer that I thought about sharing with you. So clearly there's no accidents. That was a sign from Hashem. We got to light up the darkness with this. So join me in saying this prayer. It's called Anenu. Answer us. We're saying to God, answer us. And, we're so far away from God sometimes. And as a people, we've wandered so far off the path. We've been in exile for thousands of years. There's always been a core, component of pious Jews who are just keeping it all going. but so many Jews have wandered off, and most of us are in some kind of intermediate area. We could be doing better. We're doing a lot. We could be doing a lot better, right? And so we plead to God, answer us. Let us come close. You come close to us. Let us come close to you. It's about that relationship. Forgive us. Hear our prayers. Hear our apology, as it were, for all our transgressions. And so it begins, Anenu Adonai Anenu. And I'm using God's name, or the name that we use to call God. It's not actually, we wouldn't pronounce the four-letter name of God. But we don't even say Adonai. I'm teaching it, so I'll say it, which means Lord, but it's a name of God that we use. Normally we would say Hashem, meaning the name. But I will say this because I'm teaching you the prayer. So we say Anenu Adonai Anenu. Anenu Eloheinu Anenu, right? That's another word for God. Now we'll go on in English. So answer us, Hashem, answer us. Answer us, our God, answer us. Anenu, our Father, Anenu. Anenu, our Creator, Anenu. Anenu, our Redeemer, Anenu. Sometimes I'll say it in English so we keep the meaning. Answer us, you who searches out, answer us. Anenu, faithful God, Anenu. Anenu, steadfast and kind one, Anenu. Anenu, pure and upright one, Anenu. Anenu, living and enduring one, Anenu. Anenu, good and beneficent one, Anenu. Answer us, you who knows our inclinations, answer us. Answer us, you who suppresses wrath. Answer us. Anenu, you who dons righteousness. Anenu. Anenu, king who reigns over kings. Anenu. Anenu, awesome and powerful one. Anenu. Anenu, you who forgives and pardons. Anenu. Answer us, you who answers in times of distress. Answer us. Answer us, Redeemer and Rescuer. Answer us. Anenu, righteous and upright one. Answer us. Answer us, he who is close to those who call upon him. Those who call upon him. Answer us. Answer us, merciful one and gracious one. Answer us. Anenu, you who hears the destitute. Anenu. Anenu, you who supports the wholesome. Anenu. Anenu, God of our fathers. Anenu. Anenu, God of Abraham. Anenu. Anenu, dread of Isaac. Anenu. Anenu, mighty one of Jacob. Anenu. Anenu, answer us, helper of the tribes. Answer us. Answer us, stronghold of the matriarchs. Answer us. Answer us, you who are hard to anger. Answer us. Anenu, you who are easy to pacify. Anenu. Anenu, you who answers in a time of favor. Anenu. Anenu, father of orphans. Anenu. Anenu, judge of widows. Anenu. And then it goes on. He who answered our father Abraham on Mount Moriah. Hu Ya'anenu, may he answer us. He who answered his son Isaac when he was bound atop the altar. Hu Ya'anenu, may he answer us. He who answered Jacob in Bethel. Hu Ya'anenu. He who answered Joseph in the prison. Hu Ya'anenu. He who answered our forefathers at the Sea of Reeds. Hu Ya'anenu. He who answered Moses in Horeb. Hu Ya'anenu. He who answered Aaron when he offered the incense. Hu Ya'anenu. He who answered Pinchas when he arose amid the congregation. Hu Ya'anenu. It goes on. That repetition, that simple repetition, it's meant to get us into an elevated state, almost a trance-like state of both atonement, right? We have to really despair over our transgressions and feel that holy shame over them, but tempered by joy, because our Father in heaven loves us and will forgive us and render us pure as snow if we go through this process with him. And so, making that confession before someone you love, knowing that you're being loved as it's happening. If you haven't done slichos prayers, give it a try. Okay, let's get into it. Beitzah, the 8th volume of the Talmud. Page 2. All volumes of the Talmud begin on page 2. This is chapter 1, Mishnah 1. With regard to an egg that was laid on a festival, Beis Shammai say, the followers of Shammai say, it may be eaten even on that day. And Beis Hillel say, it may not be eaten, as the Gemara will explain at length. Apropos this exceptional case in which Beis Shammai are lenient and Beis Hillel are strict, the Mishnah cites additional laws of the festivals in which this unusual phenomena occurs. Usually in disputes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. There were very few disputes, by the way, between Shammai and Hillel, the original pair of sages who are so famous, but they each established schools, and the sages who were, their students, and grew. That the followers of Shammai grew, and the followers of Hillel grew, and then they had many more disputes between the two groups. Generally, the law follows Beis Hillel, and we've learned before, why does the law follow Beis Hillel? Because they were easy and forbearing, and they stated the opinions of Beis Shammai before their own, right? But generally speaking, the law follows Beis Hillel, and usually the rulings of Beis Hillel are more lenient than the rulings of Beis Shammai. But there are exceptions, and that's why the Mishnah now, having pointed out that Beis Shammai would permit us to eat an egg that was laid by a chicken on the festival. We'll understand why this is an issue momentarily, but the idea is that it came into being on the festival. It didn't exist before the festival, and why that's a problem. So Beis Shammai would permit us to eat that egg. Beis Hillel would not. They have the more stringent opinion. Now, having stated a case where Beis Hillel are more stringent unexpectedly than Beis Shammai, the Mishnah is going to offer a few other cases that share that attribute, that Beis Hillel is more stringent than Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai say leaven. In other words, dough that has leavened to such an extent that it is no longer used as food, but as a leavening agent for other dough. This is prohibited on Passover in the measure of an olive bulk. However, the measure for edible leavened bread is greater, that of a large date bulk. Until you eat that much, you haven't violated the Passover prohibition on eating leavened bread. And Beis Hillel say for both this and that, the measure for having that leavening, that leavened dough as an agent of leavening, or eating any leavened bread at all, the maximum amount is or the minimum amount to become liable for the transgression is an olive bulk as opposed to a date bulk, right? So it's this versus that type of thing in a volume. Furthermore, with regard to one who slaughters an undomesticated animal or bird on a festival, that's one of the big differences between a festival and Shabbos. You can cook on a festival, you cannot cook on Shabbos. However, on a festival, you can only cook for the needs of that festival day itself. You can't cook something that you're going to eat after the festival. You can cook on the festival for what you're going to eat on the festival. And then you can do other things that are part of the cooking, like you could slaughter an animal that you're then going to roast and eat on the festival. However, there's a prohibition in the Torah on leaving the blood after you slaughter an animal just on the ground, right? This is part of the extreme respect for life that the Torah reflects. And so, one who slaughters an undomesticated animal or a bird on a festival, in which case there is a commandment in the Torah to cover the blood after slaughtering, Beis Shammai say, okay, so he digs earth with a shovel and he covers the blood, and you're allowed to do that. Digging is definitely the kind of work that you cannot do neither on Shabbos nor on a festival. But Beis Shammai would allow you to dig into the earth to cover the blood. That was a necessary consequence of slaughtering the animal, which you're permitted to do, so you can roast it and eat it on the festival. And Beis Hillel say he may not slaughter ab initio unless he had earth prepared for the purpose of covering the blood while it was still day. You can't dig into the ground to produce the earth that you're going to use to cover the blood. You needed to have some loose dirt lying around that you could use to cover the blood and not be digging a hole at that moment for that purpose. But even Beis Hillel concede that if one already slaughtered the animal or the bird, well, then he should dig with a shovel and cover the blood. Additionally, they agree that the ashes of a stove are considered prepared for use of covering blood, as will be explained by the Gemara. Why this word prepared? So the main two concepts that we're going to be talking about today, and it's going to come up a lot in this tractate, but it's what we're definitely starting with, is muktzeh and nolad. So muktzeh means that, for example, a hammer that you use for carpentry has no value, has no permitted use on Shabbos. Right? So you can't use a hammer on Shabbos. They will argue, could you use it to open nuts? But let's just say that the normal use of a hammer, particularly an expensive hammer that has with a particularity that you could, you need it for hammering a certain kind of nail for a certain kind of carpentry, right? Or for example, a watchmaker's screwdriver, which is absolutely a precision instrument that he uses in his work. Okay, that's going to have no permitted use on Shabbos. Therefore, since you can't use it for anything on Shabbos, it is considered muktzeh, set aside. Meaning that on Shabbos, you will not even touch it. It is not only prohibited to use it for any kind of work, it's prohibited to touch it. It's not in the Torah. That is a rabbinic decree that they issued lest we pick up such a tool, that precision screwdriver, that hammer, and then be tempted to go use it for what it's normally used for, and then we will come to violate that prohibition on doing work on Shabbos or Yom Tov, on the festival. So that's muktzeh. Certain things are set aside because they have no permitted use on the festival. Nolad means something that is new, that comes into existence during Shabbos or during the festival. This egg that the chicken laid during Yom Tov, during the festival, so it didn't exist before the festival. So clearly it was not prepared for use on the festival. So it is going to be, so at least some of the sages will say, therefore it is set aside. It came into being during the festival. It couldn't have been prepared for use during the festival. Therefore, it's prohibited. You can't touch it, and certainly you can't eat it. So the question is, why is Beis Shammai going to permit this egg, which came into existence during the festival, not only to be handled, but even to be eaten? And why do Beis Hillel say, no, you can't eat it, even though they're normally the more lenient position? Now the Gemara. The Gemara inquires, with what case are we dealing in this Mishnah? If we say that the Mishnah is referring to a chicken that is designated for eating, i.e., one planned to slaughter and eat a chicken that and it laid an egg, what is the reason that Beis Hillel prohibit eating the egg? It is food that has been separated. The entire chicken is considered food, right? You can prepare food on a festival. You can't do that on Shabbos, but on a festival, you can cook for the needs of that festival on that day. So the entire chicken is considered food as it is designated for eating, and this egg is simply a part that became detached. If you can eat the chicken, you can eat the chicken leg, you can eat the chicken neck, you can eat the chicken wing, you can eat the chicken breast, and you could eat the chicken egg that was part of the chicken. Just as one might partake of the chicken itself on a festival, its egg should likewise be available for consumption. Rather, the Mishnah must be referring to the case of a chicken that was designated for laying eggs. This was an egg-laying chicken. So the chicken itself is not considered food, and it was not prepared for use on the festival. A chicken laying egg, right, an egg designated just for laying chickens, so that's muktzeh on the festival. You can't even touch that chicken on the festival, right? Since the owner of this chicken decided not to eat it on the festival, the chicken is classified as set aside, muktzeh. And muktzeh items may not even be moved, let alone eaten. Since the chicken itself is muktzeh, its egg is muktzeh as well. And the Gemara asks, if so, what is the reason of Beis Shammai for permitting one to eat the egg? After all, it is muktzeh. So the Gemara expresses surprise at this question. And what is the difficulty? Perhaps Beis Shammai do not hold that there even is a prohibition of muktzeh. There are different opinions with regard to the scope of the prohibition of muktzeh. It is possible that Beis Shammai, like other sages, maintain that other Tanaim, rabbis of the Mishnah, maintain that there is no prohibition of this type of muktzeh. Maybe they don't hold that there's no muktzeh at all, but maybe this chicken doesn't fall into the category of muktzeh that they would ever consider that there would be muktzeh. And perhaps this is the subject of their dispute with Beis Hillel. It's not that it's permitted even though it's muktzeh. Maybe they don't even believe there is muktzeh, at least with regard to this chicken. Now, before stating its proposed solutions to this difficulty, the Gemara notes, it enters our mind to say that even one who permits moving an item that was set aside by its owners on a festival or Shabbos prohibits the owners from doing so with an object that came into being, nolad, on a festival. Now, moving the object is different. As we saw, we talked quite a bit about muktzeh when we were in tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud, and Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud, which is also about Shabbos. And for example, you can move a muktzeh item if you need its place, right? Like if somebody left a hammer on the table, on the dinner table, and now we want to eat there, and this hammer is going to interfere with our enjoyment of Shabbos because it's lying on the dinner table. So you could move it because you need its place. And what you would do is you would pick it up in a way that is not the way you normally hold a hammer. You might do it like a thumb and pinky, or with an elbow, or your two palms, indicating to everyone around that you understand it's muktzeh, and you wouldn't come by mistake to handle that hammer in a way that you might be tempted to use it as a hammer. You're just moving it out of the way. Or sometimes you can move a muktzeh item because it's a very expensive item, and it will come to be ruined if it's left in the place where it is. Right? And so the sages will permit you to move it so that you won't be stressed out about the financial loss that you will incur. That particular permission is nuanced. You got to be careful with that. You need to do a little more research on that. Don't rely on what I just told you to just move anything willy-nilly. But those are just examples, right? So you might say that here, you might be permitted to handle the chicken and the egg, but can you eat it? And can you really, maybe you can handle the chicken, but the egg has another distinctive feature, that it's not just that it wasn't set aside for use, like an egg-laying chicken as opposed to a food chicken, but the egg itself that came into being on the festival didn't exist before the festival. So there's no way that it could have been prepared for use before the festival. And so because it is new, it must necessarily be muktzeh. That's it. Another argument, right? We're not giving rulings yet. We're just, the Gemara is setting up what the possibilities are. Where am I? Came into being on a festival. So one may not move an object that came into being on a festival or Shabbos, since the owner never entertained the notion that he would be able to use it. This egg is certainly an object that came into being on the festival. So what then is the reason of Beis Shammai who permit us to eat this egg that was laid during the festival? And Rav Nachman said, actually, the Mishna is referring to a chicken that is designated for laying eggs. However, our previous assumption was mistaken, as the sage who holds that there is a prohibition of muktzeh in general also holds that there is a prohibition of objects that came into being, while one who does not hold that there is a prohibition of muktzeh likewise does not hold that there is a prohibition of objects that came into being. If you don't hold by muktzeh, then you also don't hold by the prohibition on nolad, on the prohibition on touching objects that came into being during the festival of Shabbos. Consequently, the dispute can be summed up as follows. Beis Shammai hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who maintains that there is no prohibition of muktzeh, and Beis Hillel hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who rules that there is a prohibition of muktzeh. Now, this is Rav Nachman saying it can be summed up that way. So Beis Hillel prohibit because they hold like Rabbi Yehuda, who says there is muktzeh and there is nolad, and Beis Shammai permit the egg to be eaten because they hold like Rabbi Shimon, who says there is no muktzeh and there is no nolad. That's according to Rav Nachman. And the Gemara is puzzled by this explanation. And did Rav Nachman actually say that Beis Hillel hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? But didn't we learn in a Mishnah at Shabbos 143a that Beis Shammai say, One may remove bones and shells left from the meal from the table, despite the fact that they are inedible, and that makes them muktzeh. And Beis Hillel say it is prohibited to do so. Rather, one may remove the entire board that is the table surface, which is the vessel that may be carried, and shake it all at once. By moving the table, which is not muktzeh, one is able to shake off the bones and shells, but he may not move the items themselves. So far, that Mishnah from Shabbos seems to agree with what Rav Nachman said, right? Because he said Beis Hillel are like Rabbi Yehuda, and they hold that there is muktzeh, and so you can't touch muktzeh and nolad things. And Beis Shammai say there's no muktzeh, and they hold like Rabbi Shimon, who says you can move these things because there's no such thing as muktzeh. The principle doesn't exist. However, in that Mishnah in Shabbos 143, it continues, and it says, and Rav Nachman said, that version of the Mishnah is not in accordance with the law. Rather, the opinion should be reversed, as we have nothing other than the following version of this dispute. Beis Shammai hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who maintains that there is a prohibition of muktzeh, and Beis Hillel hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who maintains that the halacha of muktzeh do not apply. Why then does Rav Nachman here in tractate Beitzah explain that the ruling of Beis Hillel in the case of the egg in our Mishnah is based on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that there actually is a prohibition of muktzeh? It seems like Rav Nachman here is attributing the fact that Beis Hillel agree with Rabbi Yehuda differently than he does over in tractate Shabbos, where he says that Beis Hillel agree with Rabbi Shimon over there. And the Gemara answers, Rav Nachman could have said to you in reply, with regard to Shabbos, this is a case where the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, taught us an unattributed Mishnah, which is generally accepted as the law, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As we learned in a Mishnah at Shabbos 156, one may cut pumpkins before an animal to facilitate their consumption, and likewise one may cut up an animal carcass before dogs so they can eat it, even if that animal died on Shabbos. The animal carcass didn't exist before Shabbos, the animal died on Shabbos. Now that's a nolad carcass. People can't eat it because it wasn't slaughtered in a kosher manner, but dogs can. And Rabbi Shimon said that you can actually cut up that animal carcass and feed it to the dogs on Shabbos, a surprising ruling. And the Gemara concludes, the unattributed Mishnah in tractate Shabbos is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And for this reason, Rav Nachman establishes that the dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai should be understood to mean that Beis Hillel hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, whom the halacha apparently follows, as there is a principle that the halacha always follows in accordance with Beis Hillel. However, with regard to a festival, the Tana taught us an unattributed Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As we learned in a Mishnah in this tractate, later we're going to see it, one may not chop wood on a festival from beams prepared for use in construction work, nor may one chop kindling wood from a beam that broke on a festival, as the beams were not prepared for use when the festival began, so they are muktzeh. And this demonstrates that an unattributed Mishnah means it's authoritative. When a Mishnah is anonymous, it means that it is actually how the law came out, and it doesn't need to be held by, it's not the opinion of one versus another, it's the law. So it demonstrates that an unattributed Mishnah prohibits muktzeh on a festival. Consequently, Rav Nachman establishes the opinion of Beis Hillel in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who prohibits muktzeh. And he does so by asserting that the Mishnah is referring to the case of a chicken designated for laying eggs, which is muktzeh. And this concludes the Gemara's explanation of Rav Nachman's rendering of the dispute. We're not going to agree necessarily with Rav Nachman. What Rav Nachman is basically saying, and the reason he seemed to contradict himself, and the Gemara is saying, well, he doesn't really contradict himself, because what he's saying is Beis Hillel is more stringent in the case of a festival where there's nolad, and more lenient in the case of Shabbos where there is nolad. And why would they hold differently on a festival and be more stringent where generally the laws of the festival are more lenient, why would they be more stringent in the case of a festival than they are on Shabbos, where the laws of Shabbos are generally more stringent than the laws of the festival? The Gemara asks, now, since, in other words, consider the following. Who is the one who wrote and edited the Mishnah and arranged the unattributed Mishnayos? It was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He was the editor of the Mishnah, also known as Rebbe. Right? So he was the head of the Sanhedrin, and he edited the Mishnah and caused it to be set down in writing in about the year 200 of the Common Era. Since the same sage formulated the statements in these two tractates, the question arises, what is different with regard to the laws of Shabbos that he stated the unattributed opinion and ruled for us in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who is more lenient and says no muktzeh, and what is different with regard to the laws of a festival that he stated the unattributed opinion and ruled for us in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who is more stringent and holds by muktzeh? And they answer and they say, in the case of Shabbos, which is generally stringent with regard to its punishments, and therefore people will not come to treat it with contempt, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi taught us the unattributed Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who is lenient. Conversely, with regard to a festival whose laws are more lenient than Shabbos, as certain labors may be performed on a festival, like cooking, which is not allowed on Shabbos, and therefore people will be more likely to come to treat the restrictions of the festival with contempt. He stated there, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, stated the unattributed opinion for us in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who rules stringently. In an area where the people are going to be more lax in their observance of the law, the Rebbe is going to offer a more stringent law to try to keep the people in line. And then an area where the people are going to be more stringent, like Shabbos, its laws are more stringent, people are more respectful of Shabbos, they know there's nothing, that you can't do any kind of a work, so there Rebbe could afford to be more lenient in establishing the Mishnah. And the Gemara asks, in what manner did you ultimately establish the Mishnah? It was established as referring to a chicken designated for laying eggs, not a chicken that was designated for eating the chicken itself. It was an egg-laying chicken, and the prohibition of its eggs, the prohibition to touch the chicken is muktzeh, and the prohibition to eat its eggs is according to muktzeh. If so, rather than disputing with regard to an egg laid on a festival, let them dispute with regard to the chicken itself. Instead of considering the secondary detail of an egg, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel could discuss whether or not the chicken itself may be slaughtered on a festival. If it was an egg-laying chicken, can you slaughter that chicken on the festival? It's perfectly good for eating, but since the farmer in his mind had set that chicken aside for laying eggs, so he wasn't thinking he was going to eat it on the festival, maybe it remains set aside and it cannot be slaughtered or eaten on the festival. And the Gemara answers, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel also disagree with regard to the chicken. But the dispute was phrased in this manner to convey the far-reaching nature of the opinion of Beis Shammai. The formulation of our Mishnah emphasizes the extent of Beis Shammai's lenient opinion, that even in the case of the egg, which is not a regular muktzeh item, but an item that came into being, it came into existence during the festival, and which is an especially stringent type of muktzeh, Beis Shammai nevertheless permitted. By stating the dispute with regard to an egg, the Mishnah stresses Beis Shammai's lenient opinion. The Gemara raises an objection. And let them disagree with regard to a chicken rather than an egg to convey the far-reaching nature of the opinion of Beis Hillel, who prohibit its use even in the more lenient case of muktzeh as opposed to nolad. And if you say it is better to present the dispute as in the Mishnah, so as to clarify the more lenient opinion, as the strength of leniency is preferable, see Bracha 60a, there is another option. and let them disagree with regard to both cases. Why don't they say Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel disagree both in the case of whether you may slaughter and cook the chicken and whether or not you may eat its egg that was laid on the festival? But it wasn't worded that way, right? So the sages of the Gemara are arguing the way that they worded the Mishnah is telling us something, right? It could have been worded a different way. The fact that it wasn't worded that way should indicate to us certain aspects of what's going on here. Now, the Mishnah could have said, with regard to a chicken designated for laying eggs, it and its eggs, Beis Shammai say it may be eaten, and Beis Hillel say it may not be eaten. In this manner, the Mishnah could have referred to all aspects of the dispute without the need for any lengthy addition. Consequently, Rav Nachman's explanation of the Mishnah is inadequate. Rather, Rabbah said, this is the Amora Rabbah, the great sage in Babylonia of the Jewish community. The great sage Rabbah is going to say, rather, here's how we need to understand this. Actually, the above explanation should be rejected, meaning Rav Nachman's explanation. Here, we are dealing with a chicken that was designated for food, and we are dealing with an egg that was laid on a festival that occurs after Shabbos, i.e. on a Sunday. And the relevant issue is not the law of muktzeh. Rather, one may not eat the egg due to the prohibition against preparation from Shabbos to a festival. And in this regard, Rabbah holds that any egg laid now, okay, so before we explain that, so for example, let's say that you had, some laundry lying around, you already washed it and you didn't fold it, and it was lying in your room, and now you come to your room, to your room, and it's Shabbos, and you're like, oh, my room is messy, it stresses me out that it's messy, I would rather have a clean room during Shabbos, so I'm going to fold up this laundry and put it away. You can't do that. You can't do that on Shabbos. Now you could say folding laundry, does that really work? Is that one of the prohibited malachas? Just folding a piece of clothing? You're not manufacturing the clothing. There's no creative, constructive work when you fold. Washing it, for sure you can't do. Folding it is not really a malacha. However, if you fold that shirt and put it in your drawer, what are you doing? You're preparing that shirt for use the next time you use it. You're not going to use it on Shabbos. You're going to use it some other day. And you can't do any kind of action on Shabbos that prepares for something that you're going to need later after Shabbos, right? You don't do that. So here, what Rabbah is saying is that the real issue is that you can't eat this egg because, and in this regard, Rabbah holds that any egg laid now on the festival, was already fully developed yesterday, and it merely emerged from the chicken today. It didn't come into being today. It came into being yesterday. Today, it merely emerged from the chicken. Consequently, an egg laid on a festival that occurred on a Sunday, right? So he's saying that the Yom Tov is on Sunday. So this egg actually came into being on Shabbos. And it may not be eaten because it was prepared on Shabbos, despite the fact that it was prepared naturally by heaven and not by the work of human hands, not by human hands. And the Gemara comments, and Rabbah, who prohibits one to derive benefit, even from something that was not prepared by human hands, conforms to his standard line of reasoning. As Rabbah said, what is the meaning of that which is written with regard to the manna in the desert? Exodus 16:5. And it shall come to pass on the 6th day that they shall prepare that which they bring in. According to Rabbah, it can be inferred from this verse that on an ordinary weekday, the 6th day, Friday, one may prepare what is needed for Shabbos. Right? On Friday, Nina is doing so much work to get the house and the food and everything ready for Shabbos. You do that. That's what we do. We prepare on Friday for Shabbos. Just as the manna was given to us by God, not just was one portion given, but a double portion came on Friday so that people would have what to eat on Saturday without going and gathering manna, right? The Torah expressly forbid that. One may prepare what is needed for Shabbos, and similarly, on an ordinary weekday, one may prepare what is needed for a festival. However, On a festival, one may not prepare for Shabbos. If Friday happened to be a festival day, you can't cook for Shabbos during that Friday, even though it's permitted to cook during a festival day. If a festival day landed on Friday, you can't be cooking for Shabbos during that festival because you can't do for a different celebration during that celebration, okay? And similarly, on an ordinary weekday, one may prepare what is needed for a festival. However, on a festival, one may not prepare for Shabbos, and likewise on Shabbos, one may not prepare for a festival. Abaye said to Rabbah, however, that is so, and the concern is only due to preparation. Well, then let an egg laid on a regular festival, one that does not occur on a Sunday, be permitted. And Rabbah responded, yes, that egg is not prohibited by Torah law, but it is prohibited by rabbinic decree due to the case of a festival that occurs after Shabbos. So the reason that the rabbi said you can't eat this egg that was laid on the festival, even though it actually was prepared by God the day before, that's when it came into being and it simply emerged from the chicken on the festival. But they say you can't eat those eggs because sometimes the festival will be on Sunday and that egg came into being during Shabbos, and you can't eat that egg that then emerges from the chicken on Sunday because it was prepared on Shabbos, and you can't eat what was prepared on Shabbos for something that happens beyond Shabbos, in this case, the Sunday festival, right? And so just because you might come to make that mistake, they're going to prohibit eggs laid on a festival day, even if the festival day is not adjacent to Shabbos. You can see it's a fence around the Torah that the sages drew to prevent us from making that transgression. This is now according to the view of Rabbah. And Abaye asked, on a regular Shabbos, one that does not occur after a festival, let it be permitted to eat an egg that was laid on that day. Since that egg was prepared on Friday and now it emerged on Shabbos, why can't we eat that egg? So long as we don't cook the egg. We agree we can't cook the egg, but if you're in the habit of eating raw eggs, why, according to the view of Rabbah, that the egg was actually prepared on Friday and it just emerged from the chicken on Saturday, why can't you eat that egg? And Rabbah answered, it is a decree due to a Shabbos that occurs after a festival, just so that you could do that, but the sages prohibited it because sometimes Friday is a festival day, so that egg came into being during a festival day, and you can't eat it on Shabbos, even though you're not going to cook it and you're going to eat it raw, because it was prepared on Friday. And lest you make that mistake, when the festival day and Shabbos are adjacent, they're going to prohibit eating an egg that was newly laid, whether it's on Shabbos or a festival. That's Rabbah's approach. Abaye further asked, and do we issue a decree of this kind? Isn't this a little bit too much of a fence around the Torah? But isn't it taught in a Beitzah? On page 6b of this tractate, we're going to get to it. In the case of one who slaughters a chicken on a festival, and he finds inside it fully developed eggs with their shells, it is permitted to eat them on the festival. And if it is so that the aforementioned decree is in effect, let him issue a decree and prohibit their eggs found inside the chicken due to those that are laid on that day. Maybe we shouldn't allow him to eat those eggs either because they could have come into being on the previous day, which was Shabbos, right? It could happen. Rabbah said to him, this is not difficult, as the case of fully developed eggs found inside their mother is an uncommon matter. And in the case of an uncommon matter, the sages did not issue a decree as a preventive measure. The sages issued their decrees only for usual situations in which people might make mistakes, but they did not apply them to the rare cases. And this concludes the Gemara's discussion of Rabbah's explanation. And it concludes my explanation as well. We just did the whole page, a little bit at the end, which we'll pick up tomorrow. So, hopefully, and now I'm coming to comments and questions, but so we did the whole page because, we've been doing this together for a while, and if it's your first time here, not easy. I know it's not easy. But the Talmud is going to be difficult no matter when and where you start. And you might as well just get exposed to it. Even if it was difficult to follow, this is your first time. That's okay. After a while, you get used to the way that the sages argue and it becomes easier. And if you've been with us for a while, hopefully by now you sort of picked up the tools and the way that the sages reason, that this isn't, totally mysterious and impenetrable, right? What they're trying to figure out is, why was the Mishnah worded the way it was worded? Why was the lenient ruling of Beis Shammai, which is a rare situation in itself, why was Shammai lenient, with the Beis Shammai lenient? Why was Beis Hillel stringent? What do we learn out from it? What case were these rulings issued in? What were they actually responding to? That's why they were asking, did this egg come out of a chicken that was designated for laying eggs, or did it come out of a chicken that itself was designated for slaughtering and eating? And in tracing out these different questions and how the sages approach them, we really get into the mind of the sages and trying to understand what really is at stake, and ultimately how the laws of Yom Tov, of the festivals, are different than the laws of Shabbos. All right, let's go to comments and questions. On Beitzah 2, because all tractates begin on page 2. Seraphim. So, does that mean that leftovers of the food cooked for the holiday are forbidden? No. That's okay. In the same way that you could rinse off a plate that you use Shabbos lunch, because you might need it for the third meal in the afternoon. You can't like run hot water, you can't heat up water, but like you could do some simple things that are okay. So if you cook that food for the festival, you cooked it for the festival. That's the part, that was the malacha that you did, which ordinarily would be prohibited for anything else, but you did it for the festival. Now, once it's leftovers, it's already prepared, right? It exists and it was prepared for eating, so you had in mind to eat it, right? It wasn't like something that you did not have in mind for eating, and so you could. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that you could have the festival came on Friday, right? And then comes Shabbos the next day. You want to have definitely a fresh meal. You're not going to have a meal that's only leftovers. That would be bad. You have to have food that's prepared. Now, in fact, when we have these 3-day holidays, meaning 2 days of a festival that is adjacent to Shabbos, that happens sometimes. Right? Like Passover could begin Wednesday night, and there will be Thursday, Friday, and then comes Shabbos. Or sometimes, you have Shabbos and then the first 2 days of Passover or of Sukkot. Outside of Israel, those are 2-day festivals. And it becomes very difficult. And then we have a mechanism that the sages enabled for us that we actually start cooking, like on Friday for the festival on Sunday, or you start cooking for Shabbos even before the festival started on Wednesday night. There's like a mechanism, an Erev Tavshilin, so that you're not cooking on festival for the Shabbos or on Shabbos for the fest. You can't cook on Shabbos anyway. We're going to get to this. I'm just not well versed in it right at this moment. But the point is, the leftovers should be okay because they're already prepared and they were prepared with eating in mind. Okay, Sharon, is the term nolad from the Hebrew root word for being born? 100%. It was born on the festival. It didn't exist before. It came into being in the same way of being born. Okay, Nina had to leave to go to a parent meeting at school. Let me see if there are any comments I could scan in the notes. Francisco, were the sages inspired by God? Were their questions and answers inspired by God? Yes. Yes, right? And the idea there is at the beginning of the Second Temple period, prophecy ended, right? The final prophets were like Zechariah, Nehemiah, and Malachi, right? The latest prophets were at the beginning of the Second Temple period. And then prophecy ended, right? But then prophecy itself, right? This spiritual inspiration, as you're saying, passed from the prophets to the sages. And that's why, and it's beautiful, right? Because now anybody who takes Torah learning really seriously and gets into these texts and delves in and tries to understand what the sages are telling us, you're actually engaged in a kind of like prophecy light. I mean, we're not prophets. None of us are prophets. I'm not saying we are. But God is speaking to us. When we study Torah, God is speaking to us. When we pray, we are speaking to God. When we learn Torah, God is speaking to us. And that is an ongoing form of revelation that's always happening. How could it be that, sages will totally disagree? And they'll come out in a totally opposite place, and they're both learned Torah scholars. If these are the words of God, how could, we end up with diametrically opposed opinions? And the sages address that question in Eruvin 13, that the words of Beis Shammai and the words of Beis Shammai, these and these are the words of the living God. We're going to have to pick one view over another, and that's why we generally follow Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai, so people will know what to do. But God created Torah in a way that would be an eternally living document. It's not dead. These are not old dead texts. They're eternally springing forth like a fountain, literally a fountain of wisdom and light. And when we delve into it and we're struggling to understand, we are engaged in that process of God's word being revealed on earth, with all its hiccups and interruptions and inspiration and ups and downs and sometimes mystery, etc. That's all part of the process. Okay. Right. Yes, Steve said, I'm not trying to be cute, but we can't cook or prepare the egg on the festivals, but it's okay to cook, prepare, and eat the chicken on the festival? Yes. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't cook eggs on a festival. You can cook eggs on a festival. The only egg that's going to be prohibited, according to Beis Hillel, and that is the law, is the egg that was laid that day, right? The egg that came into existence that day because it wasn't prepared for use on the festival. But absolutely, you can cook both chicken and eggs, right? Generally, me personally, I do not like to eat chicken and egg. That is not a kosher thing, right? It's not. You could technically eat chicken and egg together. I don't like to. That's just my own preference. But an egg is not dairy, right? Chicken is not meat. You can't cook a kid in its mother's milk, but chicken gets the same laws as meat because it is so similar to meat and is cooked in the same pots and pans as meat. An egg, you could cook either in your dairy pan or your meat pan. In your meat pan, you'd use oil. In your dairy pan, you might use butter. But an egg is parve, right? So you could eat the egg with chicken. I just don't like to. That is a total digression. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, the usual Friday time, which is noon Pacific, for the next page here in Tractate Beitzah. Have a terrific evening, and may your preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur be uplifting, illuminating, joy-filled, but deep and profound and real. All the best.